What happens when 1,000 Japanese soldiers go up against hundreds of bloodthirsty, vicious crocodiles? Who walks out of the carnage? In early 1945, during World War II, Allied forces had cornered about 1,000 Japanese soldiers in a mangrove swamp. With nowhere to go, death seemed imminent for the Japanese. Unfortunately, the worst came to be true as only 20 soldiers made it out of that swamp alive. However, the grim reaper for the 980 soldiers who died in the swamp were not the Allied soldiers, but bloodthirsty prehistoric crocodiles. This is the story of the Ramree Island Massacre, a haunting episode in history where the brutality of nature eclipsed even the horrors of war itself. To understand this tragic turn of events, we must first understand why the soldiers decided to step into the perilous waters in the first place. To put it simply, the Japanese soldiers had no choice. Stranded far from home on Ramree Island in the Bay of Bengal, these soldiers had to overcome daunting challenges. The British forces were looking to set up camp for an airbase on the island, a tactical decision that would allow them to launch more attacks against the Japanese. So on January 26, 1945, the troops made their way to the island to claim it in the name of the Crown. However, the Japanese stood their ground, resulting in a brutal battle that lasted for about 6 weeks. The scales seemed almost balanced until the British Royal Marines decided to enlist the help of the 36th Indian Infantry Brigade. Together, these two managed to outflank the Japanese position, forcing a group of 1,000 Japanese soldiers to split apart from the rest of their forces. Realizing the situation at hand, the British decided to make the most of their situation and asked the men to surrender. And that's how 1,000 Japanese soldiers found themselves facing an unenviable predicament. On their tail were enemy combatants armed to the teeth, and ahead of them was a thick swamp crawling with deadly crocodiles. It seemed like the men had only two options, both of which presented bleak outcomes: face an unwinnable battle against the pursuing enemy, or brave the perils of Mother Nature herself. One might assume that surrender would be the logical choice, but these were warriors, forged in the crucible of war. They were raised to deal with situations exactly like these. And so, like the true patriots they were, the Japanese decided to make the 8-mile journey through the mangrove swamp in hopes of joining the larger battalion instead of giving up. However, the men forgot to account for one very important thing. Perhaps the Japanese' biggest mistake that led to the massacre was underestimating the dangers that infested these waters. Living in these waters were the largest reptiles in the world, the saltwater crocodiles. These formidable creatures are known for their astonishing size, with males reaching lengths of up to 17 feet and weighing as much as 1,000 pounds. The largest among them have been recorded at jaw-dropping dimensions, stretching up to 23 feet in length and weighing a staggering 2,200 pounds. Naturally, these vicious predators possess unimaginable physical strength and are perfectly capable of killing a fully grown adult human. These terrifying creatures choose to inhabit and spend their lives within the murky waters of swamps, exactly like the one the Japanese soldiers were attempting to make their way through. Unfortunately, the saltwater crocodiles have not been known for their friendliness. These fearsome aquatic predators have rarely extended a warm welcome to anyone who dares to enter their waters. Every year, dozens of people lose their lives to saltwater crocodiles. So when 1,000 Japanese soldiers, their bodies battered and fatigued, stepped into the water, it was only a matter of time before the crocodiles sprang into action. And it explains exactly why the enemy troops decided not to follow the Japanese soldiers into the water. They expected Mother Nature to take care of the problem, and that it did. Setting off on the 8-mile journey was going to be a test of endurance and perseverance for the Japanese men, one that the soldiers were willing to make to avoid dying at the hands of the British. However, they failed to account for the brutality of the jungle. As the soldiers ventured into the waters, they began to fall one by one to dehydration, starvation, and disease. Mosquitoes, spiders, scorpions, and poisonous snakes only added to the danger of the journey they were taking. Each step deeper into this hostile terrain only intensified the life-threatening challenges they faced. However, the real threat lurking in the muddy waters only revealed itself at night. Saltwater crocodiles are nocturnal predators that prefer to strike down their prey in the dead of night, and that's what happened to the Japanese. That night in the dark, knee-deep in the slimy mud hole, with threats closing in on every front, the Japanese were caught like mice in a trap. Tired and wounded, the men had little strength to face the harrowing challenge before them, and so the crocodiles made their move. Attacking in the dead of night, these vicious predators sunk their jaws into unsuspecting soldiers, dragging their screaming selves underwater, never to be seen again. Terrified, the men tried to neutralize the threat by firing their weapons blindly into the dark, but it only added to the chaos of the moment. In the end, 500 of the Japanese men lost their lives, and though not a lot of them lived to tell the tale, naturalist and a Royal Canadian Lieutenant Commander, Bruce Stanley Wright fills the gaps of history with his account. He was part of the British efforts to capture the island, and as a leader of his unit, his job was to focus on reconnaissance. However, Bruce also focused on documenting the local sea life. He wrote about how the night of February 19, 1945, was the most horrible night that any member of the motor launch crews had ever experienced. According to Bruce, the crocodiles were alerted by the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood in the mangroves. With their eyes above the water, these predators watchfully eyed their next feast. And finally, using the tide of the water to their advantage, the crocodiles moved in on the dead, wounded, and uninjured men who had lost their energy to go on in the mud. The scattered rifle shots, ringing out in the pitch-black swamp, punctuated by the screams of agony by wounded men being dragged within the gaping jaws of the mighty crocs, made a cacophony of hell that has rarely been recorded again on Earth. As the crocodiles ravaged the scene at night, the vultures dove in the morning to feast on the carcasses they had left behind. Given the unmatched carnage and the sale of human life, the Guinness Book of World Records recognizes the Ramree Island Massacre as the largest crocodile attack in history. Despite the fact, the death toll varies according to different sources. According to one account, only 20 men emerged from the water in the aftermath. However, instead of freedom, they found the British waiting on the other side. Not wanting to jump back into the jaws of death, the men gave up peacefully this time, making sure to tell their captors of the horrors that bewitched the rest of their troops. To this day, the exact number of soldiers who died in those waters remains in the air, as no one can estimate how many died because of disease, dehydration, or starvation. According to other instances, 500 of the soldiers managed to escape the lizards. Overall, the Ramree Island Massacre will forever be etched in the pages of history and serve as a reminder of the relentless brutality of Mother Nature. However, it all speaks to the spirits of the soldiers who forged ahead to take on the challenge.